Alright, y'all. So right now we're gonna talk about the Great Divide. That the difference between how we were as a community in the '60s compared to how we are right now. So there's a few things that we have to look at in order to be able to really see the great difference as a community and as a unity, right? So when we look at in the '60s, you had all these different types of various groups going on that were popular within the community. This was right before integration, so we had our dollar circulating within our community, and we had all these various types of programs going on. We had educational programs, we had health programs, and we had all these different programs going on to involve the youth. So with all this going on, when you take a look and you move to the '70s, now when we look at the '70s, we see that there aren't, or integration started to kick in. This is after the assassination of many of our great leaders. And so now there's a disconnect. And this disconnect comes from the integration's effect on our economics, which means that once our dollar stops circulating within our community, this kind of capsized our black businesses because we couldn't compete with the white corporate businesses. So since we can't compete with them anymore, now we're losing job capacity and we're losing job opportunities for more blacks. So this happens. Now we have now we can't refinance our programs. We can't finance our educational programs. We can't finance our health programs. We can't get the youth involved because our dollar stopped circulating within the community, and now there's this disconnect between the child and the parent. Also, because now housing is messed up as well. People can't afford where they live. People are homeless now. People are now you have more divide in the family this way. So this is a big attack on the family. And this disconnect from the parent and child also lead to bad did us bad psychologically as well, because people trying to find jobs, people trying to figure out how they're going to take care of their own, right? All this going on, people are demoralized now. So this is mentally affecting the black community. But then once you get to the '80s, now you have the crack epidemic. So the crack epidemic really revolved around was another aspect of COINTELPRO. In the '80s, the crack epidemic was another implementation of COINTELPRO called mind control. So this is where you get all these different various drugs. If you want to know more about this, you want to read the book called The Manchurian Candidate by Karl Marx. And if you want to read, there's another book called COINTELPRO as well. So you can read those books to get more information on these things, right? So in the '80s, with the crack epidemic, you have different various drugs like LSD and marijuana and MK Ultra, and they split these drugs into the communities in various ways. One would be through cigarette packs. When you get the cigarette packs you get at the gas station, they slip them in there, and when you smoke them, you think you're smoking tobacco, but it's really some type of drug. And as well as they actually polluted the water with this as well, and they flooded the communities with these in different ways. So this is where we transitioned from a community, from us being, okay, civil rights movement, okay, let's figure out how to economically better ourselves. Let's fight for human rights. Let's fight for civil rights. We transitioned from this to the '80s, to where now we're talking about sex, money, and drugs, all this type of stuff, right? You can see the drastic change. Now you have a whole different message and a whole different culture that's kind of being implemented now, which was affected by the flood of drugs, right? These drugs. So you can see how this transition in the 90s, or let's actually say this in the 80s, this this dragged the psychological or the mental state of us down detrimentally. So in the 80s, this is where we just took a downward spiral completely as into what we were doing. Now the black image has completely been assassinated, right? So this is where this happens, and the black image is now not right. And now when you don't have a proper black image, now you look at the kids that see this. Most of their parents or fathers are incarcerated. Anytime you see them, or it's all promoting the same stuff, the same drug chemically related stuff now, right? But when you get to the 90s, this is where we have to talk about and understand the evolution of man, right? Because man, the thing about human beings, right, especially us, is that we evolve to fit every single environment that we're put into, right? This is human nature, to evolve to fit its environment, right? So when you look at in the 60s, when we had a very, very positive, a very unified, all in one cause group, you can see how the effects of that and how powerful we really were. When you get to the 70s, of course, you had integration and now the job opportunities scattering, people losing jobs, and now you have people homeless and people disconnected from their families and all this in the 70s. In the 80s, now you have people who are now you have drugs involved, and you have mind control and psychological warfare. So now, once you get to the 90s, now you can see that now it's becoming a norm to actually use our culture as a means of making money and doing business. Street ball and basketball and the hip hop music culture and making money off of these types of things, right? But the thing about the music, how the music changed, let's look at this, right? Back in the 50s and the 60s, we had the old African spirituals going on, right, for music. But you can see in the 70s, it transitioned into more like what was it, like some type of disco or something. And then once you get to the 80s and 90s, or the 90s, now you have a mixed message within the music. We've evolved into a hip hop culture, which was amazing, and we start talking and speaking on the environment, rapping about things that we was the same stuff that we was talking about in the 60s. But then the effects of drugs also kicked in and had an effect on us, because now not only are we talking about this, but we're talking about drugs, money, prostitute, all this type of stuff, right? So now we have all this thrown in the mix as well, because this is the environment now. The environment has changed, so we evolved to fit that environment, and so this is the good and the bad, right? But then we get to the 2000s. Ultimately, we're making money off of our culture, but once we get to the 2000s, now we're at a point to where you have another attack. So now you have record labels, and you have the black image being assassinated even more in psychological warfare, as well as gentrification, as well as even a more disconnect between the child and the parent, right? So this is 3 decades of where instances happen to where the disconnect between the child and the parent has gotten even worse, right? And it's coming through the black image, and it's coming through economics. The two things is what they is the image and our economics. As you can see, economically in the 2000s, now if you want to make money doing a certain thing, for the most part, you have to set up a false. You gotta become a false prophet. Basically, you gotta set up this false image and promote their agenda, pretty much. So this is the psychological warfare. Our kids are seeing this. Plenty of kids are seeing plenty of these different types of things. And now, with this agenda being pushed to the kids, there's even more of a disconnect now. Because we already know in the 80s that, or from the difference between the 70s or the 60s, as a matter of fact, to the 70s and 80s, the black teachers, male and female, dropped out of these public schools, or were not teaching in these public schools at around like 80. It was an 80 to 90% dropout rate. So with this 80 to 90% less black teachers in the United States teaching, now there's a disconnect between the children from education. So when you get to the 2000s or in the 2010s, now you have gentrification, a lot of people not knowing where they're gonna, get sleep at night. You have a lot of homelessness. You have a disconnect from education. You have obviously the economy is not right because there's no more dollar circulation, no more programs, no more anything to really get catered to the child at all, right, anymore when it comes to 2000s and 2010s within the community. And when you get to 2010 or 2015, 2020, now you have this social media instance to where now they can slander now they can destroy the black man's image even more. So now this social media is getting pushed now to the child after they've removed education and programs and community programs, right? So now we've removed community programs, education, and now we've slipped in the social media thing, right? So now the disconnect took another drastic hit. So now, not only do we have the effects of drugs that have kicked in and have done its major damage to culture, and we've had the effects of course, COINTELPRO in the 60s and psychological warfare throughout the 80s and 90s and 2000s. Now we have social media to deal with, right? So when we move to the 2020 and we get to 2024 in this generation now we're starting to have an awakening period to where knowledge is starting to be gathered and got to, but now what needs to happen is economic stability has to start to kick in now, and we need to get back to we need to start transitioning down to wanting to own the land back, which is going to help us to be able to create or recreate these programs and more of them. We be able to recreate these programs and grow them, the programs that we already have, to a point to where we can reconnect that youth and the youth back to the generational timeline, right? So this is the difference between how the generation is in 2024 compared to the 1960s. Now, quickly, we can talk about how this is going to come about as a solution. The solution would be to put the younger the younger generation, connect the younger generation to the program, stop using drugs completely, um, eating better foods, um, and then promoting the black image in a positive light. That way, the youth can see a different message than what they are seeing from social media. There has to be outlets to pull the youth from social media, right? So this would include art and film, the NBA podcast, some of them. This would include the music you listen to. This would include these different things. What type of message are you putting out? What type of messages are you listening to? And the kids now need to be educated. All right, there needs to be a connector back to education since that has been removed as well. So when we connect these few things back that are out of place, then there will be a better connect in between the 60s and the 2024.